Nathaniel Cross was 44 years old, and for 6 months he had been doing what good men do after loss. He kept working, kept paying bills, kept sending Camille's father a check every month out of loyalty to a woman he believed was gone. He owned Cross Electric, a contracting company he built with his own hands from nothing, and he wore his wedding ring every single day because that was the kind of man he was. Faithful, patient, steady, the kind of man people underestimate. That Tuesday morning, Nate walked past First Southern Bank on his way back to his truck and stopped cold. Because the woman standing at the counter, wearing the coat he bought her 2 Christmases ago, was his wife, the wife he buried, the wife whose death certificate he still kept in his desk drawer. She had the same posture, the same tilt of her head, the same hands. And in that moment, Nathaniel Cross understood that everything, the funeral, the grief, the closed casket, the tears, had been a performance, designed for him. What he did next would cost her everything she thought she'd already won. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Through the diner's window, the morning sun cast long shadows across empty tables. Nate Cross sat in his work truck, hands resting on the steering wheel where countless hours had worn smooth patches into the leather. The diner's neon open sign flickered against the glass, the same sign that had welcomed him and Camille every Saturday morning for 8 years, 6 months, half a year since he'd buried her. The thought settled heavy in his chest as he adjusted his worn Cross Electric cap, checking his reflection in the rearview mirror. The face that looked back at him was tired but composed, the face of a man who had learned to carry his grief with dignity. The wedding ring caught the light as he reached for his wallet. Simple gold, like his father had worn, like his grandfather before that. Some days, it felt heavier than others. Today, it felt right. Business cards spilled from his sun visor when he flipped it down. Cross Electric. Quality work. Fair prices. He'd built that reputation one job at a time, one satisfied customer after another. Camille had helped design the logo, insisted on the clean font. She'd always had an eye for those details. The diner's bell chimed as he pushed through the door. The smell of coffee and bacon grease hit him first. Familiar, unchanged. Martha, the longtime waitress, looked up from wiping down the counter. Her eyes widened slightly, but she caught herself and gave him a warm smile. "Nate Cross," she said softly. "Good to see you, honey." He nodded, managing a small smile in return. "Morning, Martha. Coffee, please." She poured him a cup without asking how he took it. Black, 2 sugars, she remembered. He settled into a booth, not their usual one by the window. That felt like too much for today. An elderly woman at the counter was counting change for her bill, quarters laid out in neat rows. Without thinking, Nate stood and approached the register. "Let me get that," he said quietly. The woman started to protest, but something in his expression made her stop. "That's very kind," she said instead. He paid for her coffee and left Martha a $20 tip. Small gestures, ways of putting good things back into a world that felt off balance. The bell chimed again as he stepped out into the morning air. The sun was higher now, warming the sidewalk. He was halfway to his truck when movement through the First Southern Bank's plate glass windows caught his eye. A woman stood at the counter, leaning forward slightly as she spoke to the teller. Her hair was pulled back in a familiar way, exposing the curve of her neck. She tilted her head. That particular angle, the way Camille always did when she was listening intently. Nate's feet stopped moving. The world narrowed to that silhouette through the glass. The woman shifted her weight. One hip cocked just so. His mouth went dry. He knew that posture. Knew it like he knew his own reflection. "You're losing it," he muttered to himself. "Grief does this. You know grief does this." He forced himself to walk to his truck, climbed in. started the engine, but he didn't drive away. The dashboard clock ticked. 9:47, 9:52, 9:58. 11 minutes passed as he sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles showed pale against his dark skin. The rationale part of his mind, the part that read blueprints and calculated loads and never guessed at measurements, was screaming at him to drive away. Instead, he cut the engine, stepped out, walked back toward the bank with measured steps. The counter where she had stood was empty now. The teller was helping someone else, an older man in a suit. No sign of the woman who had stopped him cold on the sidewalk. He stood there longer than he should have, studying the space where she had been. Everything in the bank looked ordinary, undisturbed, business as usual on a Tuesday morning. The drive home was silent. No radio, no phone calls, just the hum of tires on pavement, and the thoughts he couldn't quite form into words. His jaw was clenched tight enough to ache by the time he pulled into his driveway. Something had shifted beneath the surface of his grief. A disturbance in still waters. He couldn't name it yet. Wasn't ready to. The steering wheel bore the imprints of his grip as he stared straight ahead at his garage door, the one he'd repainted last summer while Camille supervised from the porch swing. The next morning dawned gray and cool, typical Memphis weather for early spring. Nate pulled his work truck into the lot of the downtown renovation site, the old Marshall building being converted into luxury apartments. Steel beams reached into the clouded sky, scaffolding wrapping the brick facade like a skeleton. His crew was already gathering near the job trailer, thermal coffee cups in hand, safety vests reflecting the early light. Mike, his lead electrician, raised his cup in greeting. "Morning, boss. We're running that 3-inch conduit on the east wing today?" Nate nodded, pulling his tool belt from the truck. The familiar weight settled on his hips: wire strippers, voltage tester, pliers, the tools that had built his company. "Yeah, let's start there. Should have the inspection tomorrow." The work was good, physical, demanding. For hours, Nate focused on nothing but pulling wire through conduit, checking connections, marking junction boxes. His crews worked around him with the efficient rhythm of men who knew their trade. The sound of power tools and calling voices echoed through the gutted building. But every quiet moment, every pause between tasks, brought back the woman at the bank. The angle of her head, the way she stood, the coat that looked so familiar. "Pass me that wire pull, would you?" Mike called from above. Nate handed up the tool, glad for the interruption. He worked harder, pushed faster, tried to lose himself in the mechanics of the job. But the image wouldn't fade. By late afternoon, his shirt was soaked with sweat, and his hands were grimy with wire lubricant. He'd checked every connection twice, marked every box, run every calculation. The work was perfect, as always, but his mind felt raw, like he'd been holding something too heavy for too long. The drive home seemed longer than usual. The house was quiet when he walked in, the kind of quiet that had become normal these past 6 months. He showered mechanically, ate a sandwich standing at the kitchen counter, then walked to his home office. The manila folder was in the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath warranties and tax records. He hadn't opened it since the funeral. Now he spread the contents across his desk with careful hands. The death certificate came first, official, sterile, with boxes checked and lines filled in precise typescript. Cause of death, acute cardiac event. Time of death, 7:42 p.m. Location, residence, pronouncing physician, Dr. Arnell Moss. The obituary was next, clipped from the commercial appeal. Camille Denise Cross, née Hargrove, beloved wife of Nathaniel Cross. The words blurred slightly as he read them again. The photo they'd used was from their anniversary dinner 2 years ago. She was smiling, her head tilted just so, the same angle he'd seen yesterday through the bank window. The funeral program was hardest. He remembered choosing the design with numb fingers, picking out the songs she'd loved, the Bible verses that seemed to fit. His brother Bernard had handled most of the arrangements. Nate had just nodded, signed what needed signing, stood where he was told to stand. He remembered every moment of that night, with terrible clarity. Coming home to find her on the kitchen floor, the cold feel of her skin, the 911 operator's calm voice, the paramedic's quiet efficiency, the doctor's gentle explanation. But the woman at the bank? His phone felt heavy in his hand as he scrolled to Marcus's number. Marcus had worked security at First Southern for 15 years. They'd met on a job, stayed friendly. "Hey, man," Marcus answered on the third ring. "Been a minute." "Yeah." Nate's voice was steady. "Listen, I need a favor. Yesterday morning, around 9:45, 10 Frauen. Your branch downtown. Need to see the lobby camera footage." The silence stretched for several beats. "Nate, that's not really—" "Please." Another long pause. "Give me an hour." Nate sat at his desk, not moving, until his phone buzzed. One new message, a single image attachment. The bank lobby was clearly visible in the still frame. The timestamp read 9:47 a.m. The quality wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. More than good enough. A woman stood at the counter, caught in profile. Her hair was pulled back exactly the way Camille always wore it. Her posture was identical, the slight forward lean, the tilt of her head. And the coat, charcoal wool with black buttons, the coat he'd given her 2 Christmases ago, watching her face light up as she tried it on. With precise movements, Nate set the phone face down on his desk. The room seemed to pulse slightly at the edges. The air felt thick. He sat there, unmoving, as the light outside his window faded from gray to darker gray. The death certificate lay to his left. The phone lay to his right. Between them, everything he thought he knew about the past 6 months began to crack, like thin ice. The next morning, Nate sat at his kitchen table, phone in hand, staring at the number for a long moment before dialing. His sister answered on the second ring. "Nate? Everything okay?" Desiree's voice carried the familiar mix of warmth and concern she'd had since the funeral. "Can you come over? Need your eyes on something." He kept his voice steady, measured. There was a brief pause. "Give me 20 minutes." Desiree arrived exactly 19 minutes later, her paralegal's briefcase slung over her shoulder, despite it being Saturday. She'd always been precise that way. Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she followed Nate to the kitchen table. "You're worrying me," she said, studying his face. "What's going on?" Without speaking, Nate unlocked his phone and slid it across the table. The bank photo glowed on the screen. He watched his sister's face as she processed what she was seeing. Her expression shifted from confusion to shock to something harder. "When?" The word came out clipped. "Yesterday morning. First Southern downtown." Nate's hands were flat on the table. "That's her coat. The one I gave her Christmas before last." Desiree zoomed in on the image, her fingers moving with practiced precision. "It's her. The posture, the way she's standing. That's Camille." She set the phone down carefully. "There's something I need to tell you." Nate waited, watching her gather her thoughts. "At the funeral," Desiree said slowly, "I thought it was strange that the casket was closed. For a cardiac event, with no trauma. It's unusual. The funeral director said it was the family's request. I didn't push it because—" She met his eyes. "You were hurting so much. I didn't want to make it worse with questions that might not mean anything." Something cold settled in Nate's chest. He stood and went to his office, returning with the death certificate. Desiree took it, her eyes moving over the document with professional scrutiny. "Dr. Arnell Moss," she read. "That wasn't her doctor." "No," Nate confirmed. "And not from the hospital they said they took her to." Desiree was already pulling out her laptop. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with swift precision. "Let me check something." She navigated through several pages, her frown deepening. "Here it is. Tennessee Medical Board records." She turned the screen so Nate could see. Dr. Arnell Moss's medical license status glowed red. Suspended. Below that, a notice. Under investigation for fraudulent documentation and improper death certification. The suspension was 8 months ago, Desiree said quietly. 2 months before Camille. Before she disappeared, Nate corrected. The words felt strange in his mouth. She didn't die. She found someone who would help her vanish. The kitchen fell silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching dust motes in its beam. The normality of it felt obscene against what they were discovering. Who else knew? Desiree asked. The funeral home had to be involved. Maybe others. Had to be planned, Nate agreed. His voice remained steady, but his hands had curled into fists on the table. Takes time to arrange something like this. Takes money. The closed casket meant no one could verify. Desiree continued, her legal mind assembling the pieces. The death certificate from a corrupt doctor made it official. Everyone's grief did the rest. No one looks too hard when they're hurting. Nate stood and walked to the window. The spring morning was bright, mockingly beautiful. His neighbor was mowing his lawn. A kid rode past on a bicycle. The world kept turning while his was shifting on its axis. With deliberate movements, he turned back to the table. His fingers went to his left hand, to the wedding ring he'd worn faithfully for 11 years. For a moment, he felt the weight of it. Not just the metal, but everything it had meant. Everything he'd believed. The ring made a soft sound as he set it on the table. Desiree watched him, her eyes bright with a protective anger she'd been holding back for 6 months. She waited, letting him find the words. Nate's voice, when it came, was quiet, but carried the kind of certainty that moved mountains. I need to know everything she took. Desiree nodded once, sharply, and opened her laptop again. The sound of her typing filled the kitchen. The first notes of a reckoning neither of them had expected, but both were ready to face. Monday morning came with a weight Nate hadn't felt since the first days after Camille's death. He sat in his office at Cross Electric, the early light filtering through the blinds, and dialed Wendell's number. The phone rang twice before his accountant's familiar voice answered. Wendell Pruitt. Wendell, it's Nate. Got time to come by the office today? Need you to look at something in the business accounts. Nate kept his voice neutral, professional. Sure thing. Something specific you're worried about? Past 2 years of transactions. Just want to make sure everything's in order. Nate's fingers drummed once on his desk, then stilled. I can be there in an hour. Let me grab the files. Wendell arrived exactly when he said he would, carrying a leather briefcase and a cardboard box of records. He'd been handling Cross Electric's books since Nate first incorporated, watching the business grow from a one-man operation to a respected contractor. His reading glasses hung from a cord around his neck, and his sleeves were already rolled up, ready to work. Where do you want to start? Wendell asked, setting up his laptop. The main business accounts, all of them. Nate leaned back in his chair, watching as Wendell pulled up the records. For the next hour, the only sounds were keyboard clicks and paper shuffling as Wendell worked through the transaction. Nate watched his friend's face, noting the moment his expression changed from routine review to focused concern. Nate, Wendell said slowly, I'm seeing some patterns here I don't like. He turned his screen so Nate could see. These vendor payments, they're regular, but I can't match them to any of our usual suppliers. Nate leaned forward. Show me. Wendell began highlighting transactions. Started small. 2,000 here, 3,000 there. Always just under 10,000. That's the federal reporting threshold. All labeled as vendor payments or equipment purchases. But he pulled up another screen. The receiving accounts don't match any vendors in our system. The numbers began to add up. 5,000 to an LLC in Georgia. 7,000 marked inventory restocking. 8,000 for electrical supplies. Transaction after transaction, month after month. Building like layers of brick in a wall Nate hadn't known was being constructed around him. Total transfers over 26 months, Wendell said, his voice tight with controlled anger. $340,000. Nate felt the number like a physical blow, but kept his face neutral. Who authorized these? Wendell pulled up the account permission. Camille. She had signatory authority on 3 accounts. He looked at Nate. She knew enough accounting to make it look legitimate at first glance. Spread it out, kept it under reporting limits, used business-appropriate labels. The office seemed to grow smaller as the implications settled. While Nate had been working jobs, meeting with clients, and building his company, Camille had been systematically draining their accounts. While she'd been sleeping beside him, eating dinner with him, telling him she loved him, she'd been preparing her escape, funded by his trust in her. Wendell stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. We need to call the police. This is theft, plain and simple. I've got all the documentation right here. Not yet. Nate's voice was quiet but firm. What do you mean, not yet? Nate, she stole over $300,000 from you. I know. Nate met his friend's angry gaze. But I need to know where she went first. I need you to document everything, every transfer, every account, every date. Build me a paper trail that would stand up in court. Can you do that? Wendell stared at him for a long moment, then slowly sat back down. 2 days. I'll have everything organized, cross-referenced, and documented. But, Nate, he hesitated. How did you know to look? I'll explain everything soon. Right now, I just need those records. After Wendell left, promising to return with a complete report, Nate sat alone in his office. The printouts lay scattered across his desk, page after page of numbers that told the story of his wife's betrayal in cold, precise detail. $340,000, moved out of his life in careful increments by the woman whose death he'd mourned for 6 months. Each transaction was a moment when she'd chosen to betray him, again and again, building her escape fund while maintaining her performance of a loving wife. The scope of it, the patience, the calculation, the sheer determination it must have taken, made his chest tight with a feeling he couldn't name. 2 days after Wendell's discovery, Nate sat at his desk reviewing the thick folder of financial documentation his accountant had delivered that morning. Every transaction was detailed, cross-referenced, and annotated. Wendell had even color-coded the patterns of withdrawal to show how the amounts had increased over time. The methodical nature of the theft was laid bare in graphs and spreadsheets. The door to his office opened, and Desiree walked in, carrying her own stack of papers. She'd spent the last 48 hours doing what paralegals do best, digging through public records and connecting dots. You're going to want to see this, she said, spreading documents across his desk. I traced those accounts Wendell found. They all lead back to a business entity registered in Georgia, Cole and Hargrove Consulting, LLC. Nate's jaw tightened at the sight of Camille's maiden name. Hargrove? Yeah. But here's the interesting part. Desiree pulled up a LinkedIn profile on her phone. The co-registrant is this man. Stafford Cole lists himself as a business development consultant based in Atlanta. Nate studied the profile photo. Stafford Cole was well-dressed, confident, standing somewhere tropical with a partially cropped woman beside him. The kind of man who looked good on paper. Address? Nate asked. The LLC is registered to a co-working space in downtown Atlanta. Desiree handed him a printed map. I've got the exact location marked. Nate stood up, decision already made. I'm driving down. Nate? Just to look, he assured her. I need to see this for myself. The drive to Atlanta took just under 6 hours. Nate checked into a basic hotel 2 blocks from the co-working space and settled in to watch. He parked his truck where he could see the entrance, but remain inconspicuous. The first day yielded nothing. He watched people come and go, none of them familiar. On the second day, around 10 a.m., Stafford Cole arrived. In person, he matched his profile picture. Expensive suit, easy smile, moving with the confidence of someone who believed they'd gotten away with something. Nate photographed him entering and leaving the building. The third day changed everything. At 9:15 a.m., a silver Lexus pulled into the parking lot. Nate's hands tightened on his steering wheel as Camille stepped out. Her hair was different, shorter now, natural, framing her face in a way he'd never seen. New glasses sat on her nose, stylish frames that changed the shape of her face just enough. She wore a blazer and heels, looking every bit the successful consultant. But it was her walk that hit him hardest. The easy, relaxed stride of a woman without weight on her shoulders. She moved like someone who'd shed a life that confined her, who believed she'd successfully disappeared. Nate's camera clicked steadily as she walked to the building entrance. He captured her profile, her new car's license plate, the security badge she used to enter. Each photo was evidence, each click of the shutter a small victory. He waited another hour to ensure she was settled inside, then began the drive back to Memphis. He didn't need to see more. He had what he came for. The 6-hour return trip gave him too much time to think. Each mile brought new realizations about the depth of Camille's deception, the careful selection of a partner, the establishment of a business entity, the systematic transfer of funds, the creation of a new identity, piece by piece, while maintaining her role as his wife. None of it had been impulsive. Every step had been calculated, funded by his money, executed with precision, while she shared his bed and his life. The scope of the betrayal was architectural. A house built brick by brick over years, designed specifically to collapse on him while she walked away clean. Night had fallen by the time Nate pulled into his own driveway in Memphis. He sat in his truck, scrolling through the photos on his phone. Camille in her new life. Stafford in his expensive suit. The co-working space that housed their fraudulent LLC. All of it evidence of a plan years in the making. He got out of the truck slowly, his body stiff from the drive. Inside his quiet house, he pulled out his phone and dialed Desiree's number. She answered on the first ring. "You find them?" "I found everything," Nate said. "And now we move." The morning sun cast long shadows across Otto Hargrove's small but meticulously maintained front yard. Nate sat in his truck for several minutes, watching the retired postal worker tend to his roses. Even at 70, Otto moved with purpose, his weathered hands gentle with the plants he and his late wife had planted together years ago. Nate had been here countless times over the years. Sunday dinners, holiday gatherings, quiet evenings when Camille insisted on checking on her father. Now he carried a truth in his chest that would shatter this man's world for the second time in 6 months. Otto straightened when he saw Nate's truck, a warm smile crossing his face. He wore old jeans and a Memphis Tigers sweatshirt, his silver hair neatly combed despite the early hour. "Nate, didn't expect to see you today, son." The word son hit Nate hard. Otto had called him that since the wedding, and had meant it every time. "Thought I'd stop by if you've got a minute," Nate said, climbing out of his truck. "Always got time for you. Come on in, coffee's fresh." Inside, the house was exactly as Nate remembered. Clean, organized, filled with photographs. His eyes went immediately to the mantel where a framed picture of Camille dominated. Her college graduation photo, her smile bright and seemingly genuine. Otto bustled in the kitchen, returning with 2 mugs of coffee. He'd remembered how Nate took his. Black, no sugar. These small kindnesses made what was coming harder. "How are you holding up?" Otto asked, settling into his worn armchair. "Business keeping you busy?" "Business is good," Nate said. He took a slow sip of coffee. "I wanted to thank you again for the flowers you sent to the office last month. The anniversary was hard." Otto nodded solemnly. 6 months. Still doesn't feel real some days. He reached for his wallet, pulling out a folded check. "And I keep telling you these monthly checks aren't necessary." You've got your own life to rebuild. Nate looked at the uncashed check in Otto's hand, money he'd been sending to support his father-in-law, believing it was the right thing to do. The sight of it strengthened his resolve. "Otto," he said quietly, "I need to show you something, and I need you to look at it carefully." He pulled out his phone, found the still frame from the bank camera, and handed it to Otto. The older man squinted at the screen, then went very still. "When was this taken?" Otto's voice was barely a whisper. "Last week. First Southern Bank in Memphis." Nate began laying out the evidence methodically. The fraudulent death certificate, the stolen money, the LLC in Georgia, the photographs from Atlanta. He spoke carefully, giving Otto time to absorb each piece. The older man's hands began to shake as the full picture emerged. He set his coffee mug down before he could drop it. "There's more," Nate continued. "She's been living in Atlanta with a man named Stafford Cole. They registered a business together. She's been using your family name, Cole and Hargrove Consulting." Otto's face had gone gray. He stared at the bank photo for a long time, his finger tracing the outline of his daughter's face on the screen. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken grief. When Otto finally spoke, his voice cracked with age and emotion. "She called me," he said, 2 months ago, middle of the night. I thought I was dreaming her voice." He pressed his hands against his eyes. "She said not to tell anyone. Said she'd explain everything when the time was right. That she needed me to trust her." The shame that crossed Otto's face was painful to witness. This proud man had carried the knowledge of his daughter's call for months, continuing to grieve publicly because she had asked him to maintain her lie. "I've been lighting a candle for her every Sunday," Otto said, "talking to her picture, wearing black to church, all while she was—" He couldn't finish the sentence. Nate watched Otto's shame transform into something harder, more resolute. The older man stood up, walked to the mantel, and turned Camille's photograph face down. "I won't protect her," Otto said firmly. "Whatever you need to make this right, I'll help. She's my daughter, but what she's done—" He shook his head. "The woman who did this isn't the child I raised." Nate drove away from Otto's house 30 minutes later, his coffee untouched and cold in the cup holder. He had gained something invaluable, a witness Camille could never have anticipated, her own father's testimony to her deception. At a stoplight, he pulled out his phone and called Desiree. "It's time," he said when she answered. "Find us the meanest attorney in Memphis. We're going to need one." The law office of Davidson, Meyer and Associates occupied the entire 14th floor of a gleaming downtown Memphis tower. Nate and Desiree sat across from Catherine Meyer, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, whose reputation for handling complex financial fraud cases preceded her. The morning light streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows as Meyer methodically reviewed the documents spread across her mahogany conference table. Wendell's financial analysis lay in precise stacks. 26 months of systematic theft laid bare in spreadsheets and bank statements. The fraudulent death certificate bearing Dr. Moss's suspended license number occupied its own folder. Photographs from Atlanta showed Camille and Stafford Cole entering their shared office space, living their stolen life. "The financial documentation is excellent," Meyer said, tapping Wendell's report. "Your accountant's attention to detail will make this straightforward. We can file civil proceedings today to recover the stolen funds." She paused, studying the LLC registration. "And this Cole and Hargrove Consulting, we'll want that entity frozen immediately." Desiree, in her paralegal's precision, had already organized everything chronologically. "We've documented every transfer, every false vendor payment. The pattern is clear." Meyer nodded, but something in her expression shifted as she reached the insurance documents. She went very still, reading and rereading a particular page. "Mr. Cross," she said carefully, "when exactly did you become aware of this life insurance policy?" Nate leaned forward. "What policy?" Meyer turned the document around. 18 months ago, your wife took out a $200,000 life insurance policy. Not on herself, but on you. She named herself sole beneficiary. The room went silent. Desiree grabbed the document, her hands shaking slightly as she read. The policy is still active, Meyer continued. And given the pattern we're seeing, the fraudulent death certificate, the Georgia LLC, the systematic theft, this appears to be part of a larger plan. She wasn't just leaving you, Mr. Cross. She was setting up her next move. Nate's face remained composed, but his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. She was planning to kill me. More likely to fake your death, the same way she faked her own. File a fraudulent claim from Georgia once enough time had passed, and she felt safe. The policy has a 2-year contestability period, which expires in 6 months. Desiree swore under her breath. She was waiting out the contestability window. Meyer was already reaching for her phone. I'm calling the insurance company now. We'll place a flag on this policy immediately. This moves us beyond civil recovery. We're looking at federal mail fraud, insurance fraud, and potentially conspiracy charges depending on Mr. Cole's involvement. The next hour passed in a blur of legal machinery engaging. Meyer's associates drafted emergency motions. The insurance company's fraud department opened an immediate investigation. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation was notified. Federal authorities were alerted to the cross-state nature of the crimes. The civil suit will proceed parallel to any criminal investigations, Meyer explained. We'll freeze the LLC's assets and begin recovery proceedings. But, Mr. Cross, you should understand, once these federal investigations begin, they take on a life of their own. We can't control where they lead or who they target. Nate nodded. I understand. There's one other thing, Meyer added. Given the life insurance policy, we should discuss personal security measures until she's in custody. No, Nate interrupted quietly. She won't try anything direct. That's not how she operates. She plans. She waits. She moves quietly. He stood up. And now she's going to know that I know. Outside on the sidewalk, the Memphis afternoon wrapped around him like a warm blanket. The air smelled of barbecue from nearby restaurants, of river water, of home. Nate stood there for several minutes, just breathing, feeling the weight of everything now set in motion. He drove home slowly, taking the long way through familiar neighborhoods. In his kitchen, he found a sheet of his company letterhead and a pen. The letter he wrote was short and precise. I know you're alive. I know about Stafford. I know about the $340,000. I know about the policy on my life. Your father knows too. Come to Memphis and handle this like an adult, or I'll let the federal agents handle it for you. You have 72 hours. Nate! He addressed the envelope to Cole and Hargrove Consulting's office in Atlanta, added a stamp, and walked it to the mailbox himself. The red flag went up with a quiet finality. 2 days after Nate dropped the letter in the mail, a silver Mercedes SUV with Georgia plates pulled into his driveway. From behind his living room curtain, Nate watched Camille sit in the driver's seat for nearly 5 minutes, checking her makeup in the rearview mirror, smoothing her hair. Even now, appearance mattered. Even now, she was preparing for a performance. He studied her through the glass with a detachment that surprised him. 6 months of grief had crystallized into something harder, something that could look at her without flinching. She wore a cream-colored blazer he didn't recognize, tasteful jewelry, the careful professional armor of her new life. She looked exactly like herself, and nothing like his wife. The doorbell rang. Nate waited 3 long beats before opening it. Camille stood on his porch with practiced composure, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. Nate, she said softly, testing his reaction to her voice. He stepped aside wordlessly. She entered their former home with the careful steps of someone crossing uncertain ground. Her eyes darted around the familiar space. The photos were gone from the walls, the throw pillows she'd chosen removed from the couch. The house had been systematically stripped of her presence. She turned toward the kitchen, preparing to speak, and stopped dead. The rehearsed speech died visibly on her lips. Nate's kitchen table had become command central. Desiree sat on one side in crisp business attire, a laptop open in front of her. Bernard, Nate's older brother, occupied the other chair, his massive frame and crossed arms radiating quiet menace. Between them lay a thick folder of documents, color-coded tabs protruding from its edges. "Sit down," Nate said quietly, gesturing to the empty chair facing them all. Camille's composure flickered. This wasn't the private conversation she'd prepared for. "Nate, I think we should talk alone first." "Sit down," he repeated, no louder, but with steel beneath the words. She sat. Nate took his place between Desiree and Bernard. Without preamble, he opened the folder and began laying out documents one by one. "Let's start with the money," he said. 26 months, $340,000. 47 separate transfers. He placed each bank statement in front of her methodically. Every fake vendor payment. Every equipment order that never existed. "You learned just enough accounting to hide it, didn't you?" "Nate, our marriage was falling apart," Camille began, her voice thick with practiced emotion. "You were never home, always working." "March 15th, Nate continued as if she hadn't spoken. 30,000 to Cole and Hargrove Consulting. April 3rd, 25,000. May 7th. "You don't understand what it was like," she tried again. "Feeling trapped, watching you build your dream while I—" "The death certificate," Nate cut in, laying down the next document. "Dr. Arnell Moss, licensed suspended 8 months ago. Currently under investigation. How much did that cost you?" Camille's fingers twisted in her lap. "I was unhappy. I didn't know how to tell you. The early years were so hard, and the life insurance policy." Nate's voice remained measured as he placed the policy documentation in front of her. $200,000. On my life, not yours. Taken out 18 months ago. 6 months before you disappeared. He looked at her directly for the first time. "Were you planning to kill me, Camille? Or just fake my death too?" Color drained from her face. "That's not... I never..." "The LLC registration in Georgia. The consulting business with Stafford Cole. Your new life, built with my money." Each document hit the table like a quiet gunshot. Every step documented. Every transfer traced. Every fraud recorded. Camille's composure cracked. She turned to Desiree, seeking a sympathetic face. "You don't understand what it's like being married to someone who—" "I understand fraud," Desiree cut in coldly. "I understand theft. I understand conspiracy." "Bernard," Camille tried, "you know how hard those early years were, how much I sacrificed." Bernard's expression could have frozen water. A floorboard creaked behind them. Camille turned. Otto Hargrove stood in the doorway to the back hallway, his proud frame rigid with contained fury. He wore the same coffee-colored suit he'd worn to her funeral. His hands were clasped behind his back to hide their shaking. "Daddy?" Camille whispered, her performance crumbling completely. Otto crossed to the table without a word and took the empty chair beside Nate. The silence in the room was absolute. His daughter stared at him, stripped of every pretense, every lie, every careful manipulation. She had no audience left to convince. When the silence stretched unbearable, Desiree opened her laptop with precise movements. Her voice, when it came, held the careful neutrality of someone reading a legal brief. "Let me outline exactly what you're facing, Camille." She turned the screen so Camille could see it. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation opened their case yesterday morning. They're particularly interested in the fraudulent death certificate and the systemic theft from Cross Electric's accounts. Camille's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water bottle. Desiree continued without pause. The insurance fraud referral has already been filed with federal authorities. That's not just about the policy on Nate's life. It's about the entire constructed narrative of your death. The civil suit for recovery of stolen funds was filed this morning, and as of 2 hours ago, the Cole and Hargrove LLC's accounts in Georgia have been frozen pending investigation. Camille straightened her spine, reaching for composure that wouldn't come. I have explanations for... Stafford Cole has already retained counsel. Desiree cut in smoothly. He was apparently quite surprised to learn about the life insurance policy and the planned death claim. His attorney contacted our office this morning. He's cooperating fully with investigators to minimize his own exposure. The water bottle slipped from Camille's fingers. Bernard caught it before it hit the floor. Stafford is... Camille's voice trailed off. Providing investigators with everything he has, Desiree confirmed. Emails, text messages, documents related to the LLC formation, details about the planned insurance claim. He's offering full testimony in exchange for consideration in his own case. Otto made a small sound in his throat. Camille couldn't look at him. You have one option to reduce your exposure, Desiree continued, pulling a thick document from her briefcase. Full civil settlement, immediate return of all transferred funds, signed statement of facts for the civil record. The criminal proceedings are beyond our ability to negotiate. That's between you and the federal prosecutors now. Camille's hands twisted in her lap. I need to call my attorney. Nate nodded once. She stood on unsteady legs and walked outside. Through the window, they could see her pacing the driveway, phone pressed to her ear. Her free hand gestured sharply as she spoke. Inside, no one moved. Otto stared at his hands. Bernard's jaw worked silently. Desiree arranged the settlement papers with careful precision. Nate simply waited, still as stone. 15 minutes later, Camille returned. Her eyes were red but dry. My attorney says I should sign. A wise recommendation, Desiree said, sliding the papers across the table. I'll walk you through each section. For the next 40 minutes, Desiree methodically outlined every clause, every requirement, every consequence. Camille signed each page with increasingly unsteady hands. The statement of facts was the hardest. Seeing her actions laid out in cold legal language stripped them of every rationalization she'd built. When the final page was signed, Desiree gathered the documents efficiently. I'll file these with the court this afternoon. The bank transfers for fund recovery will initiate tomorrow morning. Camille stood slowly, gathering her purse. She looked at Otto, opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again when he turned away. She glanced at Nate, but his expression was unreachable. Not angry, not satisfied, simply done. The walk to the front door felt endless. No one spoke. No one moved to stop her. She stepped onto the porch into the afternoon sun, her heels clicking against concrete that had once been her home. The Mercedes chirped as she unlocked it. The leather seats that had felt so luxurious that morning now seemed to mock her. She started the engine and backed out slowly, watching the house shrink in her rear-view mirror. Nate stood in the doorway, Bernard's solid presence behind him, until her taillights disappeared around the corner. The street was quiet, except for distant lawnmowers and children playing somewhere down the block. The normal sounds of a neighborhood where nothing extraordinary had happened. Bernard's hand landed heavy on Nate's shoulder. A silent question. You okay? Nate nodded once, definitive. He turned and walked back inside where Otto and Desiree waited, leaving the afternoon sun behind him. The door closed with a soft click that carried the weight of an ending. The legal machinery ground forward with ruthless efficiency in the weeks after Camille signed the settlement. Nate didn't need to manage it. The mechanisms were already in motion, self-sustaining now. He focused on his work, on his crews, on the steady rhythm of building things that would last. 7 days after Camille left Memphis, Desiree called with an update she'd received from their attorney. Stafford Cole had ended things completely. The frozen accounts confirmed what he'd feared. There was no money left to chase. He'd sent Camille a text message ending their relationship and blocked her number. When she showed up at his Atlanta office, security escorted her out. The man who'd helped dismantle her marriage wanted nothing to do with the aftermath. The civil settlement processed exactly as planned. Cross Electric's accounts slowly refilled as the stolen funds returned home. $340,000, minus legal fees and what Camille's attorney managed to negotiate for basic living expenses, came back in ordered waves of bank transfers. Nate watched the numbers tick up without satisfaction or bitterness. It was math now, nothing more. He took $40,000 of the recovered money and invested it in new equipment for the company. Updated testing gear, better safety equipment, the tools his crews deserved. Then he did something that made Bernard smile and Desiree proud. He hired 2 apprentices from the neighborhood, young men who needed the same chance someone had given him 20 years ago. Marcus was 18, fresh out of high school, with quick hands and a quicker mind. Deshawn was 22, working 2 jobs to support his mother, with the kind of quiet determination Nate recognized in himself. He taught them the way his father had taught him, with patience, with precision, with the understanding that everything they built had to outlast them. Otto Hargrove never publicly addressed what his daughter had done. He carried that weight privately, in the new lines around his eyes and the way his shoulders curved slightly forward when he thought no one was watching. But he made his choice clear in actions rather than words. He showed up at every cross-family gathering that year, took the seat next to Nate at Thanksgiving, brought his famous peach cobbler to summer cookouts. He wore the Cross Electric shirt Nate had given him as a gentle joke, but it became something more significant, a statement about where he stood, about what family meant, about choosing right over blood. The federal investigation proceeded without requiring Nate's direct involvement. His statement was taken, his documentation filed, his part complete. The justice system would handle the rest. He focused instead on growing his business, on teaching his apprentices, on building something stronger than before. 1 year after Camille signed the settlement papers, Nate stood outside the new Westbrook Community Center, surrounded by his crew. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was minutes away. His name was on the contractor's sign out front. Electrical Systems by Cross Electric. The building would serve thousands of kids over the coming years. A computer lab, a basketball court, classrooms for after-school programs. His crews had wired every inch of it. Desiree stood to his left, Bernard to his right. Otto was there in his Cross Electric shirt, talking quietly with Marcus about proper wire gauge selection. The morning sun caught the new equipment in the Cross Electric trucks, making it gleam. Deshawn was checking connections one final time, demonstrating the same attention to detail Nate had drilled into him. "Mr. Cross?" Marcus approached, wiping his hands on his work pants. "Can I ask you something?" Nate nodded. "How'd you build all this from nothing? The whole company, I mean. Everything." Marcus gestured at the trucks, the crews, the building bearing their work. Nate looked at the young man, eager, earnest, ready to learn. He thought about the year behind him, about the patient reconstruction of a life someone else had tried to destroy. He thought about the quiet power of refusing to break. "I stayed patient when other people expected me to fall apart," he said simply. That's really all it was. He turned back to the building, his work, his name on the sign, his life entirely his own. For the first time in a long time, he smiled. 2 states away, in a 1-bedroom Savannah apartment, Camille sat alone with court documents spread across a second-hand table. The federal case loomed. The Atlanta life she'd built from stolen pieces was gone. At 41, she was starting from zero, with nothing left of the life she'd dismantled his to build. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.